Lydia. Okay, so today we're going to talk about 100% engagement. A little bit about me. I've been working in engagement for 25 years. I've worked in sustainability, corporate social responsibility, digital transformation, continuous improvement, sustainability, engagement with communities. I've done quite a lot over the years in different areas. And I've created a lot of sort of systems and tools, and we're going to go over one of those tools today. Let's see if I can get the slides to advance properly. There we go. Okay, so just a high-level overview. These are sort of 4 key approaches that I talk about when we're looking at improving engagement results. So the last Harkn Academy session that we did was on relationship building, so we've covered that. Today we're going to talk about strategic flexibility, and I'll explain that a little bit later, but it's the idea that we're talking about planning for everyone when we're looking at engagement, our targeted stakeholders. And then our next session in February is around social influence, where I'll talk about scaling influence, and then that'll also include sort of engagement networks, including things like champions. So just to cover that. So for today, so within organizations, we have lots of voluntary initiatives. When something's mandatory, it's a little bit different. Participation rates can be quite high, but when it's something that's voluntary, even though it's sort of business critical or really important, engagement numbers, participation numbers tend to be quite low. So today we're going to talk about some really practical methods to increase your numbers and to get people on board. So we're going to talk about challenges of traditional engagement and what kind of impacts you end up getting with those methods. And we're going to talk about how do we create a clear path. So we have these goals, and how do we create that view for people to see the relevance to them. And then we're going to look at how we map that out by using a useful model. So before we get started, I wanted to just clarify a few things. First of all, what do I mean by engagement, or what do we mean by engagement when we're talking about engagement? Because that's a word that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. In a lot of organizations, they'll separate it. They'll talk about comms and engagement like they're different things. So I want to just give my perspective here. So taking a step back, thinking about what are we trying to achieve with engagement. I have a question written here that I find that it's useful to reflect on, is how do we build trust and influence and ultimately resilient, change-ready organizations whose people are on board to act on big asks? Because what happens a lot is that we only get in touch with people when we want them to do something. And that's sort of the same idea in our personal lives, that if there's a friend or a family member that only calls when they want something, you know, what's your immediate reaction when you see their name come up on your phone? You're like, oh God, what does he want now? Or what does she want now? So from now on, when we talk about engagement, we're talking about building trust and influence through fostering and maintaining meaningful relationships. So engagement is a relationship building process. And if we are continually working on building relationships, we have that level of trust, influence, and credibility. So when we do need to implement something, you know, we have an open, willing, familiar, and sort of committed group of people to work together on delivering whatever it is we're trying to deliver. So any interaction we have with someone builds or breaks trust. So that could be an email, a newsletter, face-to-face, you know, whatever it may be. Any interaction we have with someone is under the umbrella of engagement. And the sum of these interactions establishes the type and quality of our relationship. So just wanted to go over that before we get started. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of reframing engagement. So traditional engagement, you know, a lot of it has to do with sort of just creating tick boxes of activities. Do we have enough activities without thinking through what are we trying to achieve, and you know, are these activities meaningful enough. So backing up and going, why are we doing this and how are we engaging? Your list may not change, but why you're doing it and how you're doing it may change and, well, will likely change, and the impacts will be quite big. So for example, an activity for me, I feed my son dinner. So if I just made whatever I wanted, not considering what he likes, came to the table, chucked it on the table, and walked away, right? I've fed him dinner, versus if I'm his mom, I build relationships with with my son. So if I think about what does he like to eat, and I deliver it to the table and I give him a hug, and that same tick box activity, but the relationship you build and the reaction you get are very different. So that's just sort of something to keep in mind as we move forward. Right. Traditional engagement. So often what happens with traditional engagement is there is a lack of planning. So people just going out and doing things. So they have something to deliver and they just start doing things without taking a step back and doing some planning first. Or they have a particular thing they're delivering and they create a plan that doesn't reflect a clear journey for people. It's not rooted in their wants, needs, experience, etc. So that often creates the scenario where you're preaching to the choir, because a lot of people always say, oh, it's the same group of suspects. And those are the people who are probably already doing what you want people to do anyway. So it tends to be quite low impact. So when you're reframing how you're engaging people, including planning for 100% engagement, so considering everyone's experience and who specifically you're targeting, all of that kind of stuff, people feel more empowered and motivated to contribute to their goals on their own. So they have more autonomy, and it creates more of a movement within your organization. And this creates much higher impact results. I'll share some of the results I've gotten over the years at the end, just to give you some idea, but this is just sort of the key bits I wanted to share here. Now, I'm not going to go over all of this. This is kind of a lot. So in terms of delivering on engagement, this is sort of the framework that I work from. And a lot of this will look very similar, right? Discovery and assessment. So, what are the needs? What's happening already? What's working? What's best practice? Taking all the information you've collected, creating a strategy, brilliant. And often some of the strategies and plans look great. And if people saw the strategies and plans, they'd say, okay, yeah, great. But what often happens is you go from the strategy or project plan or whatever it is you're trying to deliver, and it jumps straight to creating communications. But a lot of the communications are awareness communications, and it makes the assumption that people are going to know what to do. And again, going back to the diagram before, some people will know what to do because it's already an interest to them, it's important to them, they're probably already doing stuff. But everyone else will not know what to do. And if they do not see a clear view, you will lose them in terms of participation and contribution. So the difference around this sort of framework is that instead of jumping from strategy or plan straight to a communications plan, we're also looking at, and this will include some of the things we've talked about in last Harkn Academy and then the one that's coming up as well. So today we're going to talk about the impact framework. So how do we design activities that meets people where they are and takes them on this journey, right? Ensuring a clear line for them to be able to contribute. Looking at, how are we embedding a culture, and then the other bits, which we've talked about last time. So building influence and resonating, so meaningful relationships, leveraging adoption and influencing at scale. We'll talk about that next time. Anyway, so it's just going from strategy, mapping out what that journey looks like, and then creating an engagement and comms plan that supports those journeys. So that's sort of where it fits. Why is planning for 100% engagement important? As I said, a few times now, if people don't easily see a path forward and how it's relevant to them, you'll lose them. There will be no aligned action towards whatever you're trying to deliver. When organizations demonstrate a willingness to understand these experiences and provide the meaningful support, this is more of like a belonging issue, like we're in this together. People are intrinsically more motivated to participate. And these feelings of inclusion and belonging are also key determinants of overall sense of well-being and employee satisfaction. So it's quite important. So, okay, we've gone through all of that. Wonderful. So what does that look like? What do we mean by that? So I'm going to start by just talking about this concept, and then we'll look at what the planning looks like. So strategic flexibility is a term I like to use, and it's the idea that we're all working towards common goals, but we have the ability to work towards those goals in a way that's relevant for us. And in that way, we're all creating our maximum level of impact. So there is no one way to achieve most goals organizationally, unless it's something very transactional, like everyone needs to use this finance form in order to claim travel, or whatever, anything that's really highly process oriented and it's very transactional. Outside of that, how people achieve their goals will depend on the type of work they do. Are they field staff? Are they office staff? Like what sort of department do they work in? And how they contribute will vary. So how do we ensure at large scale, or even at small scale, but how do we ensure that we're planning for everyone? So I'm going to walk you through a tool that I've developed that helps you map these out to ensure you're including everyone, and it very clearly will show gaps as well. So it's quite helpful. So let me explain it a little bit, and then I'll walk you through it. So I've been doing this for a long time, and over the years, sort of engagement, guidance, advice, best practice. There's lots out there, but not a lot of it is incredibly useful. And parts of it are sort of high-level ideas that sound great, but how do you implement them in actionable terms? And how do you take all these high-level ideas that are really important and action them together? Oh gosh, I don't know how many years ago now, many years ago, I watched a video. It was the chief sustainability officer. His name is Steve Howard. He was the chief sustainability officer at IKEA years ago. And he did a TED talk called All In for Sustainability. And he talked about the idea that if you're planning for 50% engagement, everyone's going to try to figure out how to be in the other 50%, and that you had to go all in. And I thought, got me thinking, how do you ensure that you're planning for everybody? So I started doing loads of research. What are all the key elements? And then I sort of overlaid them together, and they actually work together very well. And so it allows you to have all of these key ideas working together in your planning. So it includes the engagement pyramid, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. So it's sort of like low to high involvement, and the base with low involvement sort of bigger up to like the high commitment people who are at the top, which is a smaller level or smaller number. A marketing funnel, because with voluntary programs, we're marketing to them and trying to get them involved and move them through their journey. Volunteer stages. So I've done a lot of research on volunteerism because I worked in corporate sustainability for a long time and social responsibility. And I found these stats that sort of showed the levels of engagement that you get within a volunteer population. And I thought those 100% resonated to me in terms of what I was seeing with getting people involved in voluntary initiatives. And I'll go over all of these, the key ones in the next slide. But that was super helpful in my planning. Marketing segmentation, so looking at the different segments groups you're working within any population, and then how do you create transformative change? How do you get people to that next level? Now, so this tool that I'm about to show you is a blueprint. It's a blueprint to meet people where they are and take them through the journey. So creating maximum impact activities based on whatever it is you're trying to deliver. Now, I use the word blueprint because I'll show you some examples. You can sort of chop and change this depending on your context and what the key variables are for you in the delivery of whatever it is you're trying to deliver on. And I've used this with lots of different organizations, and sometimes I've ended up sort of modifying it just to include everything that is relevant to you. So it's just taking this and understanding that it has a lot of the key considerations in here to make what you're planning more successful, but it doesn't have to be followed to the T. Feel free to, change things up a little bit if that makes more sense. And then I just wanted to clarify, where does this fit in your planning? So as I said before, usually people go from this is our strategy or plan straight to let's create an engagement plan or a comms plan with a couple of activities. So before you get to your plan, you just take a minute to clarify what are the routes for everyone to get involved. Then your engagement and communications plan can support those journeys just to create, more impact. Now, I'm just going to walk you through this a little bit, and then I'll show you some ways to vary it, and then I'll show you an example. So, right. So if you have a look, you'll see that awareness, discovery, exploring, and championing. So within any population, you will have a variety of levels of contribution, commitment, impact, and this also comes into the volunteer principles of sort of volunteer management that I've sort of dug up that really apply here. So I'm going to go over each one of these and then we'll talk about the percentages. So awareness is making the assumption that people are not participating yet. So they're just observing. Discovery, and I'll show a little diagram in a second just to clarify a little bit. Discovery is people who are really light touch, light commitment, low inclination, low interest, whatever you want to, so however you want to frame it. But basically they're going to be just doing one-off things here, there, very easy, not a lot of effort. Exploring is medium, so they're getting involved here or there, but nothing too in depth. And then championing, I mean, those are your champions, your enthusiasts. They're the people who are, getting involved and putting in the time, putting in the effort, and helping to move things forward. I'll just go to the slide for a second. So here's just a quick characteristic description of each area. And again, you could modify these to what you feel like these particular segments would look like in your organization. But this just will give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So I'll just give you a sec to read through them. These are focused on an organization, but this could apply to anything, whether you're involving a community or if you're a nonprofit engaging volunteers, anything like that. But This sort of just gives you an idea. So I'm just going to go, and I'll send these slides so you'll be able to read through these in more detail. So I'm going to come back here now. So we've gone through those groups. Now, when you're looking at a population or a group of stakeholders, 70 to 80%, so if you look at discovery, so awareness, they're not participating yet. So once they start participating, you have the bottom 3 groups, segments. So discovery is light touch. 70 to 80% of your stakeholders will only ever be light touch, period, which is a huge amount of people. Your second group, exploring, medium touch, will only ever be 10 to 20%. And championing will only ever be 5 to 10%. So you will not get everybody to be championing. You will not get everyone to be exploring. Okay, so those will be your numbers. And we'll look at some examples in a minute, but it's just this idea that, like, for example, training usually ends up in exploring. So if you put out something new, a new technology, let's say, and you create training for it, at most you'll probably get 20% of people to ever do the training ever. So for example, a discovery activity for that information could be, you could take all of the key messages from the training and do a comms campaign around it. So although it would be really fantastic and helpful if everyone did the training, but since the training's not mandatory, if you created a comms campaign with key messages, that could go out to discovery. So even if they don't do the training, they're still seeing the key messages, for example. Right. So those are those 3 groups plus awareness. Now, the next steps to the right are what calls to action and what opportunities are in place to move the people through the journey that will be moving on, right? So how do we go from awareness? What are the steps where people would go from awareness to discovery, to exploring, to championing, if they're part of the 10 to 20% or 5 to 10% or 70 to 80%? So for example, to go from awareness to discovery, with volunteer management, I've read a lot over the years about studies about why people volunteer or how they get started volunteering. And the biggest way people start volunteering is that someone who was already volunteering asked them to join. So often from awareness, in the next steps from awareness to discovery, I often will put a thing in there to ask participants who are already going to an event or participating in some way to ask people around them to get involved as well. So I'll go over some more examples, but that just gives you an idea. Right. Now, I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples, and then I'm going to talk you through the steps. So before I said you could chop and change things, right? So what matters to you in delivery, right? Is it that you have very different stakeholders or employee types, for example? Like I said, if you work in an organization and everyone works in an office, great. Then that's not a key thing that's going to affect delivery. If you work at a place and everyone, like, I don't know, you work at a company that does deliveries and everyone's a delivery driver and everyone's always out, well, you'll engage with those people in the same way. But if you're in an organization that has people who are in the office and people who are either in retail or in the field, that will be a big differentiator in terms of how you deliver it. So maybe you would divide it that way. Or if you have particular goal areas, you can separate it by that. For example, here, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. So yeah, so for example here, you could divide it up by employee type, if that's helpful in terms of your delivery. This is focus area. So if you're, if you're delivering a company-wide strategy or change plan and it has to do with well-being, culture change, inclusion, and business change, then you can divide it up that way. Or if it's sustainability, you could divide it up by paper, water, energy, community investment, or whatever your goal areas are. And like I said, it's a blueprint. You can customize this in whatever way makes sense to allow you to ensure that you're delivering on everything and reaching everyone. So what are the steps here? So number one is I get everyone to set the objectives for each segment. So for example, awareness. What are your objectives here around creating awareness? And that's where you can also involve the next steps and the calls to action. With discovery, what are your objectives around discovery? If 70 to 80% of people are only ever going to be light touch, what are your key objectives here to take them to their maximum level of impact, even with a light touch? You could even create, you could even have an objective to create enthusiasts to spread the word, even if there'll only be light touch. So so just thinking through, what are your objectives around discovery? So for your medium touch people, what are your objectives there? How can you take them to the maximum level of impact, even though they're only giving medium touch? And then championing, what are your objectives with them? How can they help influence the others? So step one, what are your objectives in each area? And then step two, determining your key delivery areas. So whether that's focus area or employee type. And then step three, start by mapping out current activities and identifying gaps in delivery. So when I get organizations to map out what they're doing, I don't know. Oh, is this going to let me do it? Okay, I'm going to test something out here. Oh, here we go. So what I find is there's loads in championing and there's reasonable amount in exploring. And then in discovery, they just have a couple of bits and pieces. And if you look at the numbers here on the side, 70 to 80%, 10 to 20%, with the current planning that they're working on, they'll only ever engage tops maybe 30% of people if they're 100% effective with what they've delivered in these areas. So this is a huge portion of people that have nothing really planned for. Or what they'll find, for example, if they're doing it by focus area here, they'll have loads under well-being, but hardly anything under the other areas, for example. So this allows you to identify any gaps in delivery, whether it's by your employee segments or whether it's by your focus areas. So this allows you to just have a really clear snapshot around your intention versus, are you delivering on everything in the way that you were intending? Right. Right. So after we've mapped out current activities and identified the gaps, we then look at, so I get a clean slate. So based on the objectives, the key delivery areas, we then map out and so that was like the as is, right? What are we doing now? And then we map out another one to a 2B. So how do we want to fully deliver on our intentions here? And then have another go at mapping out and filling all of the gaps. And the thing with this is that it doesn't have to take very long. I mean, you can make it into a longer process, but even if you did this for 30 minutes, this would create a huge improvement in your delivery plan and the impacts that you're getting. So, right. And then once you've mapped that out, then you can see a clear journey. And the other thing too to say is that when you're working on engagement plans, it's it's never like oh, that's finished, right? Like as we deliver things and we get more feedback from people and we see what's working, what's not working, what are the key, challenges people are still having, we can keep iterating on this, but it just gives you a snapshot. I usually print it out and put it on the wall. And the other thing too is if you're working in a team, it gives you a flexible framework to work from so that it's consistent around how things are being delivered, and it's from a team delivery perspective, and it's also a consistent delivery from whoever you're working with, your employees, your community, or whoever it is you're working with. So it provides consistency. Yeah. And then once you've mapped that out, then you can move on to your engagement or communications plan, or, it doesn't have to be that formal, but you can move forward with taking action um, in a sort of more useful way. So hopefully that has all made sense. We're just going to use an example here just to give you an idea of, what all of this means. And then we can have a chat. And if you have any questions or if you want to share anything, we can do that afterwards. So this is the example we're going to use. So we're going to talk about activating voices with 100% engagement. So we're going to talk about Harkn here. So in terms of delivering Harkn as a continuous listening tool, for us, some key delivery areas are this. So there's one around adopting the technology. So it's twofold, right? So it's a new way of working culturally, right, in terms of listening. And then it's also a technology that we're introducing as well. So how do we build interest, buy-in, get people to use Harkn? And, it's sort of all those bits and pieces in terms of like implementing new change and something new. And so getting everyone on board. And then the second phase is boosting and maintaining participation, right? So how are we embedding this as new ways of working? How are we ensuring it's a safe go-to place for people to speak up and listening and showing that their voices matter? The more people that use Harkn, it provides a clearer picture of life inside your organization because it shows morale, the sort of, anonymous conversation and dialogue going on the wall. It talks about what matters to people, what their concerns are, what they're happy about, what they're celebrating, supporting one another. And then the third phase or sort of a delivery area that we have to think about is once we've been, so we're listening, we're pulling out key insights. What do we then do with that information? So acting on feedback, in areas where it requires some business change based on, what your people are telling you, how are we engaging people as being part of the solution, that type of thing. So what I've done here is I've taken the tool, and at the top, I've done the 3 phases. So the little lines here sort of delineate the different areas. Now, as I said, with the idea of the blueprint, you'll see that there are no lines across the awareness piece. And in this scenario, when I was doing the example, I realized that whether we're talking about adoption, boosting participation, or talking about the insight-driven change, it didn't make a huge difference. So I just, here, I'll put the examples here around awareness. It didn't really matter in this scenario whether it was under one or the other. But if, for example, if you were talking about employee types, people in the office, people in the field, remote staff, for example, then how you contact them in this scenario with awareness, it would matter. And they could be in each column, specific to each column. But in this scenario, it didn't really matter, so I've left it open. So that's a customization here, just depending on the context. Right, so how are we reaching people? Internet articles, posters, bulletin boards, new employee packs from HR. So every new employee who comes in would learn about Harkn and know that it's there and what it does and how it's used and all of that kind of stuff. Word of mouth, so champions or other enthusiasts. I mean, that could be, for example, that could be a part of your activities with everyone. It could just be something, you know, talk to your new colleagues about it. All staff emails, social media, Microsoft Teams announcements, team meetings, all staff meetings, operational meetings, you know, however you contact or communicate with your stakeholders normally. Then moving on to discovery. So this is the adoption phase that we're looking at now. So launch events, challenges, and as I said before, talking about campaigns. So campaigns by topic. So depending on, for example, Harkn supports culture change, well-being, inclusion, psychological safety. So if any of those were of particular interest to your organization, you could do campaigns by any of those topics to get people involved. Webinars, catalyst events are events that lots of people always have things in the back of their mind that they feel like they should be doing. Like when I used to coordinate sustainability events, we used to have this commuter challenge event, sustainable commuting event that we did every year, and it was this scenario where so many people are like, yeah, I've always been meaning to like figure out a route to bike to work or carpool or take the bus or, you know, whatever the thing is, but they just never do it. There's no real reason for them to do it. You know, everyone's busy, la, la, la. But every year when we would do the commuter challenge, it gave people the sort of impetus to actually seek out the information. Or, you know, some people would bike with other people. They're like, oh, you bike? I bike, you know, I'd like to bike. Can I bike with you? Or carpooling, you know, they seek out people around them. So it gives them the push to actually do the thing that they said they should be doing. So yeah, webinars, relaunch campaigns. So we talk about adoption when it first starts, but if you get a group of people starting in the beginning and then you want to sort of give another round to get people using Harkn, you could have a relaunch campaign that, you know, sort of drums up more interest. Exploring. So we're going to go straight down. We'll do adoption first, then we'll do boost and maintain participation, and then we'll do insight-driven change. So exploring, for example, and I'm not going to do loads here. I'm just giving some examples. So exploring, training for line managers. That's sort of a medium touch activity. You can do webinars on specific topics that are of interest to people. And again, with Harkn, you're always listening every day. There's loads of anonymous conversation going on the wall. So there'll be lots of ways to, you know, come up with ideas on what you could be sort of doing different webinars or, you know, other training on that people are looking for. Championing. So again, there's we have champions groups, so they could become a champion. Having leaders that are championing using Harkn from a cultural perspective, so working together to create and communicate listening and response plans. So the thing with having a listening platform, I mean, it's great. People can, you know, speak up and share what's going on for them, but it equally is important that they're being listened to and that they understand who's listening and what's happening with the things that are being brought up. So there's the adoption piece. So next we're going to start going down and talking about boosting and maintaining participation. So how do we make sure, so, you know, a launch happens, everyone's excited, everyone goes in and just to see what's going on, but how do we maintain that enthusiasm and usage sort of levels? So having so what happens in people's day-to-day life is very much influenced by their teams. So having line managers and team leaders encouraging their team to use Harkn and, you know, talk to them about why it's important. on Harkn, there's an option to ask specific questions. So it's not just there's continuous dialogue, but if there is something that you see coming up and you'd like to know more about, you can ask a specific question and start a focused discussion right there on the wall. Sharing usage stats, because sometimes people think, oh, no one really uses that, but often the stats for Harkn are usually quite high. So I think it's quite useful to show, that lots of people are using it, and sort of prompts people to sort of get on there if they think it's being more widely used. And then also the idea of sharing, changes. So what's been happening as a result of people speaking up? What's changed? What have they actioned? Exploring. So there's team room discussions on Harkn where you can have sort of focus group chats that are outside the wall, but anyone can join. Again, sharing usage stats and talking about what's happened as a result. Training champions, so building their ability to engage people on the wall and, help support and, act on insights and clarify things in different areas, because the champions are from around the business and, they know the people, they know what's going on. So you can often go to them as well to, for them to be involved in clarifying what's happening and seeking out information. So, the insight-driven change. So what do we do as a result of these insights? So again, questions on the Harkn wall, feedback from line managers on topics if something comes up, because often you'll see, oh, there's an issue. I see some information here, but how do I get more information to get to the bottom of what's going on so we can start addressing it? So there's some other ideas here. Solutions lunches. I used to do these a lot. When I was working in sustainability, when something would get raised and we'd get a lot of sort of feedback around, that it has been an issue and it's something that they would, people would like to address. We'd hold solutions lunches where people would come and discuss it. And it was actually quite a useful thing to do. Harkn team room discussions, involving champs, so down to championing, involving champions and helping to lead change. Again, sharing changes and responses to insights. Next steps, again, I'll send this to you. You can read it all, but the first bit is really around calls to action. I have creating catalyst events here to get people involved, or then asking those who are already participating to involve others. Discovery. Again, you'll see here, I've just created some example calls to action or ways to get people involved. Because you can't just hope that they'll become really involved. You have to just provide the opportunity and then make sure there's space where they're being asked, or there's a call to action for them to act. Because often people would be quite happy to do it, but if they're not just going to turn up and volunteer for the most part. So if you provide the opportunities and the calls to action or ways for them to be invited, your participation rates will dramatically increase. So basically, as you get further up, you're creating more specialized tasks or different sort of leadership opportunities and training, professional development, and then having people get more involved in, leading on some of these things company-wide or even in their own areas. It depends on, what the insights are. So anyway, so this gives you an example of some types of activities you can do. I just wanted to give you some results. So this was just from one place that I worked. So before I arrived, someone had been working in my role for about 3 years. And the planning that I did with this, it wasn't quite as polished as the tool I have now, but it did have a lot of the same elements. And in my first 12 months, I increased our sustainability teams by 400%. So I went from 30 teams to 120 teams, which was about 1,500 sustainability champions. And I ended up, and I can talk about this next time in the next session, but I coordinated all of those people completely on my own. And I created a system to do it, and it worked quite beautifully. And it had to do with like regional leaders, and it worked really well. But I can talk about that another time if that's of interest to anyone. I talked about the sustainable commuting event. We increased the participants by 440%, and it was up to, it was up to 8,000 people were participating company-wide. Oh, cost savings. So we started working towards very specific sustainability targets. And this is just a couple of the numbers. In our first year, we saved $1.1 million, this is Canadian dollars, in paper. And that didn't include the savings in toner. And actually, probably quite a significant savings is that because we were a consulting firm, we had a lot of secured shredding, paper shredding, and that was very, very expensive. So we saved a lot on that. Electricity, it's a little bit harder with electricity because we didn't own any of our properties, so that was a bit trickier, but we did save 90,000 in the first year. And I delivered this all with a very, 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 very tiny budget. Right, just a summary. Where does this all fit in your planning? So once you have your strategy or project plan or whatever it is, we then use the tool to just really get very clear on what's the journey for everyone. And then we create our plan that supports those journeys. Again, this is just just reviewing the steps that we talked about earlier. And if anyone has any questions, I just put some example questions there to get people thinking if you're not sure. But if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.